This map shows the Macedonian Empire at its peak under a 25-year-old king. By that age, he controlled more territory than anyone in history, claiming a massive percentage of the known world. To understand how he dismantled the largest empire on Earth, we need to rewind. We have to look away from the vast battlefields and shrink the borders back to his starting point, the tiny, rugged kingdom of Macedon. He was born to King Philip II, a feared warlord with a specific expectation. His son must grow up to conquer the world. His mother, the mysterious Queen Olympias, told him he was descended directly from the gods. This left the prince in a unique position. He was a child carrying the conflicting instructions of a ruthless general and a mystic, burdened with surviving divine expectations. At 13 years old, that raw ambition was handed over to history's greatest mind for refinement, Aristotle. Aristotle trained the prince in medicine, politics, and philosophy. But what fascinated the boy most were stories of heroes like Achilles, leading him to sleep with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. This education was designed to make him more than a soldier. Aristotle was teaching him how to observe the world closely and think through problems that sheer force couldn't solve. The ultimate test of that education arrived in the form of a wild horse brought before the Macedonian court. Seasoned soldiers and nobles tried to mount the beast, and all of them failed. While the older men watched the animal's strength, the young prince watched its behavior. He realized the horse was panicking at the sight of its own shadow moving on the ground. He walked up, grabbed the reins, and turned the horse directly toward the sun, blinding it to the source of its fear. He mounted the animal and rode away on Bucephalus, a horse that would stay by his side for years. His intellect was functioning as a weapon. He could control powerful physical forces that older, stronger men couldn't understand. When Alexander turned 20, King Philip was assassinated. Rebellions sparked immediately across Greece, as enemies expected the untested boy king to fail. He responded with the ruthlessness of his father. When the city of Thebes resisted him, Alexander leveled it so completely that the rest of Greece surrendered without a fight. This chart illustrates his next move. Carrying the confidence of his mother's divine claims, he invaded the Persian Empire with only 40,000 men, a force dwarfed by the massive numbers of the enemy. He shattered the army of Darius III at the Battle of Issus. He won through audacity, charging straight at enemy kings in the thickest chaos, leading from the front like the heroes in his books. Standard practice in ancient warfare often meant the humiliation or enslavement of high-ranking captives. But when Alexander captured the Persian royal women, he guaranteed their protection and treated them with respect. This act shocked his enemies, replacing their fear of a barbarian invader with a growing loyalty to a respectful king. He was conquering their reputations as effectively as he was their land. By age 25, the Macedonian prince had dismantled the largest empire on Earth, claiming its wealth and its history. His rapid success was the product of a specific, intentional combination of traits. He possessed the unyielding ambition of a warlord, the divine self-belief of a mystic, and the sharp intellect of a philosopher. But a mind built purely for conquest possesses no off-switch. Having taken the known world, his engineered ambition compelled him to keep marching, pushing his army toward the very edge of the earth. By the time he was 32, Alexander the Great had marched his army 20,000 kilometers, pushing to the edge of the known world. Across a decade of continuous warfare, he held a perfect record. He had never lost a single battle to an enemy force. His tactical brilliance peaked in India at the Battle of the Hydaspes. Facing armored war elephants and King Porus, Alexander executed a devastating flanking maneuver to break their lines and capture the opposing king. But his true genius in that victory was diplomatic. When Alexander asked the defeated Porus how he wished to be treated, Porus simply replied, "Like a king." Alexander immediately returned his throne, securing a massive, stable ally on his eastern border. Co-opting rival kings was a highly effective strategy for expanding borders without endless occupation. Yet, while Alexander focused on turning foreign enemies into friends, he was completely ignoring a breaking point within his own ranks. His men were exhausted. Most of these soldiers had not seen their families in Macedonia for 10 long years. and every new victory only pushed them further away from home. When Alexander ordered the army to march deeper into India, the veterans finally snapped. They laid down their weapons and flat out refused to move forward. No opposing empire, no enemy phalanx, and no charging elephant had ever been able to stop him. His first defeat came from the men who built his empire. Furious and heartbroken by the betrayal, Alexander finally conceded. He turned his massive column around and began the long journey west. Rather than taking a safe route, he led them straight through the brutal Gedrosian desert. Thousands of soldiers died of thirst and heat exhaustion, a march many historians believe was designed to punish his men for their defiance. Driving an army past the limits of human endurance might conquer geography, but it ultimately destroyed the trust of the very soldiers who made him a legend. 3 years later, in the spring of 323 BC, the army rested in the city of Babylon. Here, the seemingly invincible conqueror suddenly collapsed with a severe, debilitating fever. Within days, he was completely bedridden. For centuries, scholars have debated the cause, suspecting everything from malaria and typhoid fever to old battle wounds, or even a targeted assassination by poison. But ancient accounts record a bizarre detail about the aftermath. For several days following his presumed death, Alexander's body showed absolutely no signs of decay. To his followers, this was undeniable proof that he was a living god. This diagram outlines a much darker modern medical theory. Many scholars now believe Alexander suffered from a rare neurological disorder like Guillain-Barré syndrome, a condition where the immune system attacks the nerves, causing progressive paralysis from the feet up. Because the paralysis affects the respiratory muscles, his breathing would have become so shallow that ancient doctors couldn't detect it. Alexander wasn't dead. He was completely paralyzed and likely fully conscious, trapped silently inside his own body while his generals mourned around his bed. The man who commanded the known world and conquered millions of square miles ended his epic campaign entirely unable to move a single muscle or utter a single word to save himself. His second great defeat was entirely internal. It proved that no amount of strategic brilliance or battlefield dominance can outmaneuver the absolute limits of human biology. As his breathing finally slowed to a stop, his top commanders crowded around him, demanding to know who would inherit the vast empire he had spent his life building. With his final ounce of strength, Alexander reportedly offered a 3-word whisper: "To the strongest." Years earlier, he had secured peace in India by handing King Porus his crown back. Now, rather than naming a clear successor to maintain stability, he left a power vacuum fueled purely by ego. Looking at this map, you can see the immediate result of that decision. Those 3 words shattered the unified empire, triggering decades of civil wars as his former generals tore his kingdom apart to claim the pieces. His physical empire died the moment he did, fractured by the same ambition for power that had fueled his own march across the world, a force he had mastered on the battlefield, but failed to restrain in his final command. Yet, out of that political destruction, an enduring cultural legacy survived. Hellenistic culture spread across 3 continents, and cities bearing his name, like Alexandria, thrived for centuries, elevating him to iconic status. Alexander conquered the globe, but he couldn't conquer the human condition, the exhaustion of his soldiers, the limits of his own body, and the volatile egos of the men he left behind. Yet the chaos of his empire's collapse is precisely what turned a mortal man into an immortal legend.